Howdy folks, and welcome to the Hillbilly Kitchen. Today we're making fried pies. Now this is a really old, really simple, really basic recipe. You can use any fruit in it, but I'm using apple today. And I'm going to link the video where I did fried apples in here because that's what I'm using in this. That is another super simple, super basic, super easy recipe. You want to start with 4 to 5 cups of apples. You just add some butter and some sugar and some cinnamon and cook them until they're tender. But I'll put that video in here so you have all those measurements and everything and you know exactly how to make the fried apples. If you don't want to do apples, you can do cherry, peach, strawberry, blackberry, just anything. And you can shortcut this by using pie filling in them if you want to. You can get, any store-bought pie filling, or if you have canned pie filling that you've made at home, any of that'll work in this. And you either want to slice or cut your apples up in little bitty cubes before you cook them, or you want to bust them up after you cook them. And you can use anything, one of these. You can use a potato masher, you could use a whisk, you could even take a butter knife and just slice through there and cut them up. But you want to get them in little pieces because great big pieces of fruit and a little bitty pie, if one pulls out, half of your pie is not going to have any fruit left in it. So go ahead and bust those up or cut them up before you cook them. Okay, now for the pastry. It's basically a biscuit with egg in it. I've got about 2 cups of self-rising flour here. If you only have all-purpose, you can add a little baking powder and salt to it and it'll work just fine. I'll put those measurements in the description of the video so you have those. You can sift your flour or you can take a whisk and whisk it up. That'll get the lumps out and it'll put a little air in it. You need 1 egg because I said it's basically a biscuit with egg. You need about 1/2 cup of milk. You could also use buttermilk in this if you wanted, just whatever kind of milk. And you need 1/4 cup of fat. Now I'm using butter. You can use butter, you can use lard, you can use shortening, whatever you want. I like the flavor of the butter. And you can even fry these in butter, but if you fry them in butter, the butter burns and you're going to have to clean that burned butter out of your pan every time before you add another pie to it, or it will taste burned. So it's really hard to fry them in butter. I like the flavor, and if I was just making 1 or 2 for me and Brett, sometimes I do fry them in butter. And the only other thing you need is enough oil to fry them in. And you can use any oil. You can also fry them in shortening or lard. Entirely up to you again. But you want about 1/4 inch in your pan. And then when you add a couple fried pies to that, it's going to bring them up past the middle of the pie. And that's what you want. Now for the crust, I'm going to start by cutting my butter into my flour. And you can use your hands for this. You can use a pastry knife, pastry blade, which is basically just some wires with a handle on it and you cut it in like this. And I had one of those and it broke, and when it broke I discovered that a whisk worked just about as good. You want to mix it until it looks kind of like sand. And I softened my butter a little bit. I usually at least have it at room temperature. And I know a lot of folks say, freeze it and cut it in and stuff like that. My granny never froze her butter when she was making biscuits or anything else. It's just much easier to mix it in if it's softened. So you don't need to worry about freezing it, and you don't need to make your life difficult. And you can use your hands to mix this in. You just kind of pinch it until it looks kind of sandy like this right here. And that's all there is to that. Okay, and the next step is I'm going to mix my egg and my milk together. And I'm going to take me a fork and just kind of whisk that up a little bit. I don't want that whole egg in there. And you could have just mixed the egg up by itself and then added the egg and the milk, but you do want to make sure you get that egg pretty well mixed up. Like I said, you don't want the whole egg in your dough. And then you just pour your liquid into your flour mixture. And now all I'm going to do is fold this together. And again, you can do this with your hands if you want to. I usually use a spoon or a spatula because when I get the super sticky dough on my hands, I have to take time to clean it off in order to be able to handle the dough. And I think it's just easier to mix this with something, a spatula or a spoon, and either one will work. Now, this is a pretty sticky dough. It's stickier than biscuit dough, and it's a little more delicate and harder to handle because you're going to be rolling it out so thin. But after you get it kind of turned into a dough ball, flour your work surface. And this mat here, I want to tell you all about these mats. Alex actually got this for me, and it grips the countertop. It's a dough mat. It's got all these little gauges on it and stuff, so you can tell how big around you're making your pastry, which is nice. And it doesn't slide around like the regular vinyl mats that I was using. You want to be pretty generous with your flour when you spread it out because, like I said, this is sticky, and you're going to work this a little bit more than you do biscuit dough, but you're still not going to go crazy. This is not yeast bread. You want to make sure you use plenty of flour or you'll have it stuck everywhere. And just knead this a few times until it gets to a point where it's not too sticky to work with. Add more flour if you need to get it to that point. Okay, that's not too bad there. I'm going to add a little more flour because it is sticking. Okay, once you get it to the point where you can work with it, you're going to cut it in 8 pieces. This is enough to make 8 pies. So just cut it in half. If you don't have one of these dough blades, I do recommend getting one of them. You can get them at the Dollar Tree, and it's just a piece of folded metal with a handle on it. It's not super sharp, but because the way it's made, it cuts through the dough really nice. And cut them in half again, and cut them in half again, until you have 8 pieces. Now, here's my best tip for you. Kind of turn these into little balls and set them aside and let them rest for a few minutes. They are much easier to work with if they have rested for a few minutes. And I know a lot of folks say, you know, you can't leave dough that has baking powder in it, you know, that's not yeast dough. A lot of people think that will mess your baking powder up. It won't. And you don't even have to form them in little balls. It just makes it easier if you form them in little balls before you start rolling them out. Just however, form them up and then set them aside. And I've got some dough over here that has been resting already. I've even got some here that I've already rolled out, and I'm going to tell you about that. A dough blade is also going to help here when we start to roll these out, because it's going to tend to stick to the surface no matter what kind of surface you're using, and you want to clean off any pieces before you start rolling them out that are on there, because that will cause the dough to stick once you roll it out. And it is a very delicate dough. It's a biscuit that you're making a 1/16 of an inch thick. You can almost see through it. You're going to get it that thin. Put some flour down. Plenty of it. And then you're just going to roll your dough out until it gets to be about 7-8 inches. You can mash these out completely with your hands if you want to. You can mash them right on out. If you don't have a rolling pin, it works just fine. Or you can use a rolling pin. And you just want to roll them out kind of slow, going from the center until you get it big enough. When you get about halfway there, you want to pick it up and check and make sure it's not sticking. Because as you roll it out and you mash the flour out, it will tend to start sticking. Okay, that's plenty big enough right there. Now when you get to this point, go ahead and turn your skillet on, because you want to preheat your oil. You want to have your oil good and hot before you put these in your pan. Now we're going to put just, I don't know, a few teaspoons of fruit in here. Maybe 3 teaspoons or so. It's kind of up to you, but when I'm eating a fruit pie, I want some fruit in it. You don't want to overfill them because you have to be able to get your crust sealed around them. But again, you want to put enough in. I mean, a fruit pie that's all crust is just no good. And I know we've all had fruit pies with no fruit in them. I've probably got at least 3 tablespoons in there. And once you get your fruit in, well, you want to take your finger and take a little bit of water and go around the edge. And what this is going to do is this is going to help your crust seal. And you can get fancy and brush it on and stuff like that, but your fingers will work just fine. Just moisten it up a little bit. Fold your crust over carefully. And then again, take your fingers and kind of pinch it together first. That's step number 1. And you can see here I have a lot of extra crust. That's okay, we're not going to leave that. Kind of get your pie in a position where you can work with it. And take just a regular old kitchen fork and go around the edge and finish sealing it up. And once you get it sealed up, take your regular old kitchen fork and go around the edge and kind of even it out. Take off some of that extra crust, because all that extra crust out there will tend to burn when you're frying it, and it won't be good. It won't just be like crispy crust, it'll burn. You can also get those cute little dough things, you know, you put your dough in and it mashes it. It's actually hand pie molds if you wanted to get some of those. And you don't have to do all the fork stuff. You just roll your dough out, put it in there, put your filling, and lift the lid over, and it mashes them flat for you. Okay, and that's all there is to sealing one up. And this is where your dough blade really comes in handy, because you can move them around with it, and you can also lift them up and put them in the hot oil with it. So I definitely recommend getting one of these for $1. It's kind of it's a really handy kitchen gadget. You can use a little piece of the dough that you cut off the edge of your pie to check your oil so that you know when it gets hot. Some of y'all are going to notice that I was running a little low on pie filling there, and you're also going to notice that I've already used my skillet. Well, there's a reason for that. This is actually the second time I filmed this video today. The first time, I did not cut my microphone on, which meant there was absolutely no sound whatsoever on the video. And I noticed it as I was ending the video. So, all of y'all who tell me about how forgetful you are, you got nothing on me. I mean, I do this same process over and over again, and how in the world I managed to get through setting everything up and checking everything, because I check it all a couple of times. I mean, the process is turn the cameras on, format the memory cards, put batteries in the microphone, both the receiver and the transmitter, tape the microphone on me, then I check all the lights, and I go back and I check everything, turn all the cameras on, turn the microphones on, check to make sure all the cameras are turned on, check to make sure the microphone's turned on, all that stuff. Did all that, never turned the microphones on, and did not check to make sure the microphones were working when I was checking to make sure the cameras were working. Why? I don't know. Actually, I do know, and I'm going to tell y'all why I did it too. Okay, my oil is not quite hot. It's bubbling. You can see here that it's bubbling a little bit, but not a whole lot. We want it to get a little bit hotter than this. We want it to really be bubbling around that piece of dough there. All right, so now it's bubbling good. You can see here how it's really sizzling around that dough. That's what we want. And we'll get this out of here because we don't want it burning in there. You want your heat kind of on about medium. You might have to turn it down a little bit, but you want the pies to continue to fry at a good rate, but you don't want them to burn. So real carefully, slide your pies in your oil, and you want a nice sizzle like that when you add them in there. But make sure you don't drop them because you don't want to burn yourself. And you can see how when I added the pies, the oil rose up and it's well past the center of my pie. That's what you want. You want to have enough oil to do that. Now, I'm not going to bore y'all by continuing to roll out fried pies and stuff them until I do 8 fried pies, because that would take forever for poor Brett to edit, and it would bore most of y'all to tears. You make all 8 of them the exact same way. And you can top them a lot of different ways. You can make a glaze. This is the same glaze that I used in the apple fritters. It's nothing but powdered sugar, a few drops of vanilla, and enough milk to make it into a liquid. You just want it where it's barely pourable. It's probably not got a tablespoon of milk in it, about a half cup of powdered sugar. You can just sprinkle powdered sugar on them, or you can mix up some cinnamon and sugar and sprinkle that on them while they're hot. You can also add cinnamon into the glaze if you want to and do a cinnamon glaze on them. But when the glaze is cool, it dries and it's very slick and shiny, and you can hold it in your hand. It doesn't get all over you. It's not sticky or anything. And if you put the cinnamon on the pies while they're hot, a lot of it will stick. Not all of it, but a lot of it will. And again, you can hold it in your hand and it won't get all over the place. Now you want to keep an eye on these because they are only going to cook 3 to 4 minutes per side. And they are already ready to turn. When you turn them, again, be super careful because you don't want to get splattered with that hot oil. Well, I said that I know why I did the whole video without turning on my microphone. Also, when I was setting up to re-video this, I spilled a whole thing full of cinnamon and sugar. I was setting it back over here after I cleaned everything up from the first video and dumped it in the floor, and it went everywhere. Now, I wanted to give it up and just not do anything at all today. But I had one of those little aha moments the other day. One of those little Christian truths that just kind of pop out of the Bible at you. I was reading in Jeremiah 17:7 and 8. Starts out, "Blessed is the man that trusteth in the Lord, and whose hope the Lord is." Now, the way that is worded, the Lord, he doesn't just hope in the Lord. The Lord is his hope. And that makes a difference, the way it's worded. We hope for a lot of things, but when our hope is the Lord, it's a real hope. And that verse, or that chapter, goes on to describe that man whose hope is the Lord as being like a tree that is planted by the water. If a tree is planted on the bank of a river, its roots go down into the river. And it doesn't matter how hot it gets, its leaves don't wilt. They stay green and lush. No matter how hot it is, it doesn't pay any attention to the heat. And even in the years when there are droughts, that tree doesn't change. It continues to grow because it's getting its water from the river, not from the rain. It's not something that is dependent upon the season or the time. The Lord is steady. He's always there. That hope is always real, no matter what else is going on. And that it goes on to tell us that even in times of drought, that tree continues to bear fruit. So what that said to me is that even in bad times, God's people, those people who truly have the Lord as their hope, then they continue to flourish. They continue to be blessed, because God's blessing isn't contingent upon whether or not it rains, or whether or not the economy goes up or down, or inflation goes up or down, or what's going on in the world. God's people are always blessed because their hope is constant, their hope is real, and they hope in a living God. And that's why I filmed this video without sound, and that's why I spilled cinnamon and sugar all over the kitchen, because when you have something that God wants you to share, or something that God wants you to do, quite often Satan will attack it, and he'll attack it to the point where you want to throw your hands up and give up. Don't give up when Satan starts attacking you. Wipe up the flour mess and start over. Sweep up the sugar and keep going. Oh boy, these look good. This one right here is probably the most perfect fried apple pie ever made. Now, you can drain these on paper towels if you want to. I don't. I never drain anything like this on a paper towel, because the paper towel gets moist and soggy both from the grease and from the heat. And when that happens, it's going to make your pie moist and soggy, and it's not going to be good. So I drain them on a rack. You can get racks pretty cheap, and you can get them anywhere. You could even pull a rack out of your oven, or if you've got a small countertop oven, most of them, the racks in them will work for cooling racks too. So if you're short of racks, use a rack out of your little countertop oven or toaster oven if you've got one. A rack out of an air fryer will work. Any kind of rack will work for a cooling rack. And I do like them better, like I said, drained on a rack, because they don't get soggy. It doesn't make the pastry soggy. The glaze, I've already got that one glazed, of course, from where I did the other video. You can put the glaze on when they are hot or cold. If you put it on while it's hot, it's going to tend to be a little bit thinner, because it's going to actually, the pie will actually melt it and it'll run. You can dip them, spoon them, pour it, brush it, however you want to get it on there. If my bowl was a little bit bigger, I would just dip it, because that's the easiest way to do it. And I actually chose this bowl because I thought it would be big enough, but it's not. But that's all you do to glaze them. And the powdered, or the cinnamon sugar, you just sprinkle on. If you want the powdered sugar on them, it is best to wait until they're cool, because the hot grease will absorb a lot of it and it'll take a lot more. But you just sprinkle it on. And you could actually mix a little cinnamon in with the powdered sugar too if you wanted to, for extra flavor. But it's really just that simple. And like I said, it's a super basic recipe. You can use any flavor fruit you want. You can use the canned store-bought pie filling. And you can use canned biscuits to do this. Get the big ones, you know, the ones that are about this big around. And don't get the flaky ones, because you're going to have trouble rolling those flaky ones out. Do the buttermilk or the home style, not the layer ones, if you want to use a canned biscuit. And you could probably use just your favorite biscuit recipe, but the egg kind of helps bind the crust a little bit better, and it also makes the crust a little bit lighter. I have tried them both ways. And these are delicious. They're a super quick treat. They fry in just a couple of minutes. And it's something that you don't have every day. It's certainly one of those things that you're probably going to remember your grandma making when you were a kid. So it's one of those things that can kind of bring back memories, and they're good for all year long. You're not going to heat up your kitchen a whole lot when you're making them, because you're frying them, you're not baking them. And it's even a recipe that you could take camping with you if you wanted to. Especially if you did the canned biscuits, you know, you could just mash them out and let the kids do it. Use a plastic plate or something and mash them out on the plastic plate, and let all the kids make one while they're camping. And you don't have grease splatter all over your kitchen if you do it outside. But that's just some ideas with these. It's an old-fashioned, delicious treat, and it's easy to pick them up and eat them. They're good hot or cold. They're best warm, but you can wrap them up and put them in a lunchbox or take them on a picnic. Before we go, I did check the mail, and I got some cards. Oh my goodness, and this pretty one's got grease splattered on it. This one is from Donna. And I'm going to have to hold them. Donna has a ministry, and I'm going to ask her if she would to post her address. I don't want to post it, but it's called Sword of the Spirit Ministries. And what they do is they recycle Christian books and Bibles especially. They take ones that maybe you're not using and give them to other people. So if Donna wants to post her address, maybe where people can send books to, or maybe even donate to it if they want to. And also, she's in West Virginia. Donna, I don't know if you're interested, but I have hundreds of paperback Bibles that we had for a ministry that we had years ago, and I'm actually looking for somebody who can use those. So if you're interested in paperback Bibles, I've got hundreds of those. Leave a comment, get in touch with me, and I'd love to get those to you. And I got another card from Marianne, and Marianne has sent me other cards. It's a beautiful Easter card. It has forsythia on it. And ever since we have been in this house, like 23 years, every year I have said I was going to plant some forsythia in the spring because I love those yellow flowers first thing in the spring, and I still haven't. This year I'm planting some before it's too late. But in it, she says, happy spring, and boy, don't I know it. After this winter and this last year of being locked up, I have got cabin fever and spring fever so bad, I can't stand it. The two of them together might kill me. And I also got a very nice letter and a gift from Melinda in Texas. And I want to say hi to Melinda before I leave. Melinda is a child of God. She is just such a sweet, sweet lady, and she has truly blessed me. Melinda and her family would really appreciate your prayers if you would add them to your prayer list. I know she would appreciate it, and so would I. So I want to thank y'all so much for joining us in the Hillbilly Kitchen. If you have not already, please don't forget to click like and subscribe before you leave. And until next time, remember to put God first.